Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tonight is Woke Wednesdays. We do this every single Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Herson. I am the host of Woke Wednesdays. And tonight we have an amazing panel on the show. We're talking about abortion. So much to talk about, so much to unpack. But before we get started, would you like to introduce yourselves, please? Who are you? What do you do? What's your favorite ice cream? Unless you're lactose intolerant.
I am.
Okay, I am too, but I
am lactose intolerant.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so my name is Tomanisha John, and I'm a PhD candidate at FIU. I study Canadian banking dominance in the Caribbean, to put it shortly. I am lactose intolerant, and I usually don't eat ice cream. And I had ice cream 2 days ago for someone's pre-birthday, and I've been gassy. But today it was kind of nice.
Well, glad that's not happening anymore. Yeah.
I'm glad too.
Yeah. Next.
So my name is Patty, Patricia Aurora. I graduated from FIU. I'm currently in my gap year to medical school. I always like to say that my field of interest is global health because it encompasses everything that I'm interested in, which is politics, social justice, medicine, healthcare, people. And my favorite ice cream is cookies and cream.
Okay.
And I don't buy almond ice cream or something. Like, if I'm gonna eat dairy, I'm gonna eat dairy and commit.
Okay.
There you go.
Commit. Okay.
Lactose intolerance life. You just gotta dive in.
Okay, so my name is Angelica. Everybody calls me Angie. No. I am a undergrad women's and gender studies student with a focus in labor studies. I'm in human resources for my 9 to 5, so there's that. And I am semi-lactose intolerant, but I love chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream. It's never gonna separate me. And cheese, we can't forget cheese. So here I am.
Well, thank y'all for sharing intimate stories about your internal
our enzymes
and all that stuff. So we do this every single Wednesday at 9 p.m. And if this is your first time tuning in, please feel free to ask questions, post comments. This is meant to be interactive. Our panel is very, very knowledgeable. And tonight we're talking about abortion. So it's been in the news everywhere, rightfully so. A lot of conversations going on regarding abortion. So we thought we'd get started first with women's autonomy. What does this mean to you to have autonomy over your own body? And if we have viewers, please feel free to tell us what you think having autonomy over your own body is, what that means to you. So whoever would like to go first can get at it.
I mean, your body's everything. It's how you move from place to place is for me to be, right? It's how people view you, how people stereotype you. Your body is everything. That's your physical, right? So your body is important. From birth to death, your body's a thing, right? And I say that because you can be born able-bodied and then something can render you disabled, and then you're in a completely different social status, structure, understanding, reality of the world, something like that. So your body as a man versus a woman changes in the way society perceives it, in the way you move, right? In the way you dress, in the way that you express yourself, in the roles that you are expected to take. Your body is that first vehicle and the most tangible that we have that says who we are, what we are, and determines a lot for us, essentially. So when it comes to bodily autonomy, which we'll talk about, it matters because it is almost everything that we have here.
Whenever I hear the word autonomy, I also think about agency. So it's not just your body as the vehicle that you are able to experience the world in and also walk around and live in, but just being able to determine where you want to be and at what specific time. I also think that when we talk or have conversations on bodily autonomy, we shouldn't just limit ourselves to people who are able-bodied. Like, there are some people who are born disabled and then they end up being in a hospital, bedridden for the rest of their days, but I still think that person should have agency for their body to be protected and sort of how they experience or interact with the world. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because I'm reminded of a story from 2 months ago, I think, but this woman who was born bedridden, she actually gave birth, and then it turned out that she was being raped in her, what was supposed to be her hospice or her safe haven. And so the fact that she did not have agency in her body over that time for her body to be protected as it is, I think that that's a big issue. So it's just, having agency to be able to determine what you're able to do with your body in a way that isn't inflicting harm or pain to yourself, like being able to have the choice on how your body is protected, how your body is able to navigate the world, and those types of things, I think are also important.
Thank you.
Oh, you guys are looking at me. Okay. Agreed. There's a really good post that I've seen kind of circulating the internet, and I know it came from Tumblr, and it's basically, them saying bodily autonomy when we talk about, reproductive rights and things like that. It can be, people get very defensive over it, but there are simple acts of bodily autonomy that we do all the time, and when it comes to medical fields, bodily autonomy is expressed in things like organ donation, and just the simple act of like going to the hospital or going to the doctor, donating blood. Nobody is forced to donate blood. It's something that you choose to voluntarily do.
Or cell plasma.
So yeah, so definitely the conversation of body autonomy with women, with people who have uteruses, things like that. Like that is, people I think overcomplicate the idea of what bodily autonomy is, and it becomes this big issue when we talk about these people, but it's really very simple.
Yeah,
it's something that you express every day.
I like that you mentioned that about donating, because one thing that I'm sure we'll touch on later is an abortion topic is, as women you can sell your eggs. If you really want to, you can sell your eggs. That, yeah. I mean, you don't want to. It's a painful procedure and it's very risky. A lot of women become infertile from it.
I want to.
Because, if you don't want to, personally, me, I want to have kids later. I thought about it once because I was like, I got all these eggs. Let me sell them. But yeah, because you can, right? I have a choice. It's my body. It's the same as with my blood. Just like how men, if you want to be a sperm donor, you can be a sperm donor. It's your body.
Some of y'all don't need to be donating sperm. So real quick, I want to read some of these comments. It's dumb how men get to essentially dictate women's bodies and tell them what they do. Someone said, pretty gal said, it's nice to put faces to the page. Someone said, MAGA, yikes. Duende said, men with uteruses exist. So real quick, we're going to be addressing a couple things tonight. Roe versus Wade. We're right now talking about women's autonomy over their own body. We're talking about gender inclusivity a little bit later. So we are going to get to just different topics throughout the night. So one big thing has been kind of backlash, has been that men don't get to tell women, cisgendered men especially, what they can do with their bodies.
But
and for sure. So when you hear this, and we can talk more about autonomy over the body because that's a very interesting topic. There have been dissertations written about this. But so, what are kind of some the sentiments that come to mind when we know that a lot of men? There was a picture that I think in Trump's office. It was something about regarding birth control or reproductive rights, and it was all men in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So when you kind of see these pictures, what are some things that come to mind that a man gets to tell you what to do with your body?
The patriarchy.
So for me, this question is complicated in a sense that there are white male lawmakers in so many other developed countries who aren't passing shitty ass laws like this. I think one of the fundamental problems that you have in the U.S. is that there are too many men making decisions in a country about women's bodies where sex education is not a thing that is happening. Mm-hmm. Men and women aren't learning in the U.S. education system about bodies, about medicine, about sort of how organs function or operate. You have people in college who are literally saying they didn't know what a woman's clitoris was, until way later on in life. And so, exactly. And so you just have all of these myths that it's not necessarily just who is in the picture, because you can have women who are not in women's interests. Like some women can be pro-choice and want to limit the bodily autonomy and agency of others. And so I don't necessarily think it's as much a function of sort of gender in any sort of binary sense as it is a systematic limiting of education in the United States on things like gender, on things like sex, on things like race, racism, on things such as, contraceptives, how all of these things operate, that it is uniquely, for a developed country, it is unique to the U.S. where you have lawmakers making decisions that they are uninformed about because of an education system that is failing and has failed and continue to fail people repeatedly.
I have a follow-up question, but I'm going to let them go first. And real quick, Pat Miller saying, if abortions are murder, then blowjobs are cannibalism.
That's funny.
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny. Autonomy.
Well, not autonomy. I was thinking about the lawmakers. So, I was discussing my job, right? I work at a very ritzy place, and often am I the fly on the wall on really important conversations by very wealthy people. And my favorite is old white men, because I can literally probably regurgitate to you and to them, group by group, different months, different groups of old white men, and also middle-aged white men, and they all have the same debates and the same justifications and the same discussions and the same response to all of these problems. And I used to get really angry until I realized they're just out of touch. So the example that I want to give is just from the Me Too movement, I have overheard disgusting conversations. From the Me Too movement to Kavanaugh, right? And anything that really had with gender or immigration or something that had nothing to do with them, they all have the same type of, not that it has nothing to do with them.
Speak a little bit louder. Yes, please.
It all has to do, they all have the same answer for everything, right? And I don't think they're malicious, right? Because they're very kind to me, whatever, and I don't think they come from a place of hate, but the answer is always the same. Well, no, they live in a just world, compared to how the world really is. They're well, these laws are in place and these things are in place to protect, to serve, to this, to that. No one was malintentioned when they made this ban, that law, or, he probably wasn't malintentioned when he was flirting with her. She was just sensitive, because their world is just. Their world was literally made by men like them, right? These laws were in place, these social structures, the patriarchy is for them, and therefore they really don't see nor feel the pressures or the tensions of women, people of color, non-binary, whoever is not them. They don't understand the struggle because it's nothing that's ever been made clear to them. That is not how their body moves, and they move differently, and they don't get it. So when they're signing those laws and they're doing these things, I truly believe that to a certain point they think that they're doing good. Is it bothering some people? Sure. Will it hurt some people? Sure. But morality, that's where it ends.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that. I definitely think that they definitely intend to hurt people, and they know what they're doing.
Oh, definitely.
But
I don't think they care.
we can touch on that next.
I don't think they care like that. They're just some people are gonna suffer, but at the end of the day, I'm doing my best, but they don't know that struggle. They don't understand.
Yeah, they're never gonna know.
Exactly. And
when I hear that men don't get to control my body, or it brings me back again to another post that I saw that was amazing, and I was just yes. And I reposted it yesterday, that nothing that somebody without a uterus will go through will ever equate to pregnancy. Going through that and enduring that and going through that process, giving birth, things like that. Nothing that somebody without a uterus can do will ever equate to that, because there really is nothing that a body can do that does equate to that.
Kidney stones at max.
Maybe. Debatable. I could definitely have a kidney stone. So, and I do have a uterus. So But then there's also, like, again, coming back to, like, the gender thing, there's also that whole, like, no uterus, no opinion. And I do think that we can touch on gender for a minute here because, yeah, there's definitely men with uteruses. There are non-binary people that have uteruses. There are people that don't have uteruses at all, no matter what gender they identify with. So this is definitely an attack on people with uteruses, I would say. It's also, in general, and I would like to clarify this because this is something that I do truly believe, it's also an attack on femininity and women's gendered expectations. So I think that it's important to clarify that in the discussion, that the people who are being attacked are people who do present as feminine, and people who, like, non-binary people whose bodies are constantly being put under control. And anybody with a uterus has the right to feel attacked because you are being attacked. Your reproductive choices are still being taken away from you because they're no longer being given to you as choices. But definitely, I don't think that anybody in this room thinks that men with uteruses cannot be a part of the discussion.
Absolutely.
I'm hoping. So that's...
That was something that I actually meant when Gerson asked, like, you know, what do I want to... What is something that I think that we should not exclude from this conversation is that I told him we shouldn't include trans people or non-binary people because I don't think that the discussion about abortion banning should be limited to people who identify and present as, you know, female and women. Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
I also don't have kids.
No, do you want kids?
Do I want kids? At this point in my life, no. I feel as if earlier on I was saying I don't want kids at all, but I feel as if there was some guy that I magically fell in love with and everything was nice, maybe I'd want kids, but at this point in my life, I don't think I want kids.
Okay. I want kids, but I don't want to be pregnant. It sounds horrible. Sounds like the worst.
No, it doesn't.
You can adopt
me? Oh, I
All
know.
of
I
those
know. I
things.
want to adopt. Like, I don't want to be pregnant. It does. I don't
It's not
think
horrible.
it's
The idea of pregnancy absolutely
horrifies
disgusts me.
It scares
Like,
me.
absolutely, like...
It doesn't disgust me. I think it's beautiful. I just don't want to go through it. Because my
Yeah.
body might not react. Because there's some women, like, love it and it's a great experience, you know? And the reason I asked this question is because it's so different for everyone, right? Like, I feel like the more and more I grow and I see people going through emergent adulthood and figuring things out, and, like, our life span is longer than it used to be in human history, so we're discovering things about ourselves. It gives us more choices. Globalization is a thing. But the more life goes on, like, there's just, everyone can take their own different routes, and, like, what works for you might not work for someone else.
Bodily autonomy.
Right.
So-
reproductive rights,
so
you know?
Full circle.
Real
Exactly.
quick, so Joey's making a point. What is saying? Also, the fact that a white woman wrote the abortion bill.
Yeah.
So even if you have a uterus, you could still take away somebody's body autonomy. So I think
And that's
this-
what I was talking about when
Yeah.
I was presented with this question,
Definitely.
is that we shouldn't only think that men and they're susceptible to patriarchy. I think, I don't remember who, but someone wrote that white women and, you know, other women actively act as foot soldiers of the patriarchy.
they're the backbone of the patriarchy.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and that's why I tied it into sort of this education. And that's why all of my critiques on my social media accounts have been from this sort of capitalist, class, and race perspective,
Yeah.
which by who are these bans being written for? What is the function that they want for these people to reproduce? And just also the fact that you have a white woman who wrote the bill, a white governor who signed the bill, and all that white men had to do were vote on the bill. The bill would not have been a thing in Alabama had a white woman not written it and had a white woman not signed it into law. And that's why I related it to other developed countries. Ireland, for instance, I think that they just made abortion legal, no questions asked ever again. And there were men. So I don't think that we could just say it is only this group of men,
Oh,
unless
it's
we also
definitely
tie
not.
it into education that they're receiving, which is
Yeah.
not a lot in
Definitely
regards to sex ed, et cetera, et cetera.
So this is interesting because we've talked about identity politics on the show. There's an assumption that we were talking about this earlier, if you look like something, if you present as something, then that has certain political inclinations. Like it's called essentialism, right? That you have these essential kind of characteristics to what it means to be you, whether it's a man, whether it's being white, being black, whatever the case is. And the case is that the true thing is that this doesn't always happen like this. So you can be a woman and still be a horrible person, passing systematic laws that disenfranchises other women, people with uteruses. So when we talk about body autonomy, it's at a kind of individual level, what you can do with your body without anybody else telling you what to do, no matter who the fuck you are. So like, I think this is a very important part of the conversation. Now, let me ask you this, because I think both of y'all kind of mentioned education and like that's what I'm kind of going to school for. I'm an education PhD, and I don't believe in education like that. Like in the sense that
sex ed?
In the sense that if we educate, no, for sure, sex ed, but there is another assumption that if we teach people that if you know better, you'll do better, and I hate that expression because it's not always the case.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes it's not. Sometimes because you know that is exactly the reason why you're gonna pursue that and kind of push that, which is I think
That's
part of your point.
That's what happened with
Right? You were saying that
so
people know what they're doing.
It's definitely, education is basically just used as a reinforcement. So I think that's kind of what both of you were getting at, that education can be used as a tool to reinforce the idealistic, the values that we want to instill in people. But I definitely think that there are horrible, horrible people who have PhDs, who are lawyers, who have been in decades of school. And at the end of the day, like, yes, there's lots of statistics that show that people that are go through higher education come out and they tend to be a little bit more leftist. There are lots of people who start going to school and they come out a little bit more on the liberal side, although we know liberals aren't leftists. But there's still plenty of people that use it as a tool to
oppress others.
Uphold the beliefs that they either were taught, the things that have been instilled in them.
Right.
There's nothing that education can do to bring those out of people.
But specifically with sex ed, so I mean, pull out the experience card. So I had the opportunity and privilege to teach sex ed, right, in a different country, which I find like really parallel, because when I was there, I was like, what am I doing at home? Now I feel like I have to teach sex ed in the U.S. So somebody give me access to your classroom, I'm there. I got it. Because I feel like sex ed as a topic, like, you can definitely plant malignant seeds with a lot of topics of life, right? Like we were talking about professors in academia, and like, your morality kind of like goes into your work as well, right? Like there's implicit biases in the world and everything. But sex ed, at least for me, right, as an educator that I was in that time, science is objective. And no, science is objective.
I don't agree with that.
Can you turn it into eugenics and type of studies like that? Absolutely. There's actually, follow the Instagram page, The Nib, really good comic, and they went into like mad scientists, like when people go like, not crazy, but it's just like when ideas trail off. I completely agree, right? Because people have used science and have used studies to hurt people, abuse them, oppress them, right? Do like horrible studies. That's why there's mistrust in medicine. But for like the topic of like sex education, it's like, listen, giving the power to somebody to know their own body before there are consequences when they had to learn about their body is a power. Because I can think of my own sex education in middle school, and I still go back to that classroom when I learned about oral sex, when I learned about anal sex, about different types of contraceptives, different types of protection, why it was that the HIV virus went into your body this way but not that way. Those things matter. Because even though I was like, what the hell's going on? I'm so bored. It's like 7th hour. I'm tired. Later in life, I still went back to that. And you know what? It probably saved me and a lot of people from a lot of disease, harm.
I don't think we're saying that.
I also want to interject that you guys spoke about higher education and sort of this rebuttal, but for me, I was just thinking about my own high school experience. So I was fortunate enough to go to a high school that taught sex ed. And it's not just the teaching, because it was super awkward. It was my advisor that we saw every day, and he was teaching us how to put a condom on a freaking cucumber and a banana.
In high school?
In high school. And so I was like, this is weird. But I think what was important about the sex education and being in high school was that it taught you about condoms. It taught you about IUDs. It taught you about different preventative measures. It gave you resources to Planned Parenthoods. And so when I think about sex education, it's not just now I know male and female body parts, how someone gets pregnant, how someone prevents pregnancy, but sex education provides people with actual resources. There's this fear. There's this fear amongst people that, you know, when people are young and they're having sex, for instance, so, you know, my sister, she was a teenager, she got pregnant, for instance, like, she did not have the same sort of sex education that I did. She did not have the same access to opportunities or knowledge. Like, when I just think about how scared it is because society heavily stigmatizes abortion even when it was legal. And so we're talking about abortion bans now, but abortions were still stigmatized even as it was legal. It's that people are shunned from, you know, seeking out those avenues and being able to ask from them. So when I think about sex education, I don't just think about learning about male, female bodily, functions, or also just about STIs and STDs, but I also think about the actual tangible resources that these classes are able to point you to for preventative measures, for contraceptive measures, and even for abortive measures. And so to me, that is absolutely important. And it is important that in the US, people are not learning about this. Like, sex education should be mandatory. Mandatory.
So two things real quick. So absolutely, sex ed should be required. What I was saying is that let's not also assume that this is the end all be all.
Of course.
So that was like kind of my point. But absolutely, sex ed should be required everywhere. Second thing is that it's a misconception. Abortion is still legal. And abortion it's a federal law. Yes, even in Alabama, that abortion ban does not go into effect until January 1st, and you can still push back on it. The big reason that these things are being passed in certain states, and over a dozen at least, a lot of them have been struck down, is because they're trying to challenge Roe versus Wade.
So
that's the biggest reason.
Since they've stacked with the Supreme Court.
Because
real quick,
of
the last point real quick, as far as higher education and science, and this is kind of my point earlier that I was trying to make, was that in the United States, eugenic centers were up and running at Harvard University, and it was pushed by presidents of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt being one of them. So when we talk about the way science works, what people have wielded education for has been historically horrible and all over the place. Oh, sorry?
And presently, in 2014, a scientist found that black women were the least attractive scientifically.
Still, absolutely, but we can kind of, that's a whole nother kind of, it'll take us somewhere else, the conversation. So trying to bring it back to abortion. So one of the things that we were talking about before the show was, why do we think, well, let me see if I can read some of these comments real quick, because I've been ignoring people. Pablino said, I think Roe versus Wade states that an abortion can happen no later than 24 hours. I think that is reasonable.
24 to 26 weeks.
Donna said, I definitely agree sex ed is important, but because of a lack of queer education, same-sex couples learn sex from porn, and that shit is damaging. It's a very real thing.
Real.
Thank you for saying that.
When I grew up, there was no LGBTQ anything in my sex ed, and that's a huge
We didn't even have sex ed
problem.
in my high school.
Yeah, and that's a point that I wanted to make, actually, because I think that I'm also speaking from a place of my own experience, like we all are. I didn't really have, the elementary and middle school I went to were severely underfunded and overcrowded. I didn't have sex ed as far as watching that really weird video about the woman giving birth where you can see like her whole vagina and like labia, everything. And then there's also, extremely, and then that really weird video, I don't know if you guys remember it, about like STDs and STIs.
I had a PowerPoint.
That like, they were very vivid.
My school was also underfunded, so we didn't get any videos or stuff. I think that since I went to an immigrant school, they were trying to push on us, if you have sex, don't get pregnant.
Yeah, I think for me it's coming more from a place of like, I understand the need for sex ed because my sex education was largely myself. And even for going to a really great high school, as we all know, just because your high school is funded and, you know, that doesn't mean anything. And they didn't touch on sex ed. It was really just if you had biology class, you got taught about, again, STDs. Basically, the worst possible things that could happen if you had sex. So I think that sex education also in itself, when we talk about that, is making sure that it's comprehensive, because a lot of those resources, when we talk about sex ed, aren't actually included in sex ed curriculums, even in states where it's required to be taught. Sex ed itself still needs to be reformed in states where it is required, where it's not about, just abstaining from sex, because those resources aren't required to be provided to students. So I think that that's also a great point, and we just have to like make sure that when we have the conversations, a lot of people don't unfortunately have access to those things. So that's really where I was speaking from. And I was also, when referencing education, I was also speaking more of education as a whole, because I think that what really circulates is education, like as an entirety, just going through higher education. But definitely, I think that the thing with Roe versus Wade, definitely, and I know we're gonna lean into that now because that's where this conversation is going.
Of course, where it needs to go.
So definitely the vagueness of these laws is what's really, they're doing it purposefully to make it go to Roe versus Wade, making it so that there are no exceptions, because they know that that's the kind of thing that the Supreme Court would take on.
Right.
It's, yeah, I mean, you guys can jump in.
Agreed. Always. Agreed. High body. So this is like a I guess side caveat. I don't know, like a wish or something, like a prediction. So Roe versus Wade, like the whole sorry, I'm so soft spoken. I always get yelled at this throughout my entire life. So Roe versus Wade was essentially found the right to privacy, right? So it essentially came down to that a woman has the right to privacy of her own body, her own decisions, etc., etc. And it was further defended through oh god, I can't remember what they're called right now. But it doesn't say it objectively in the Constitution, but Amendment 1 through 9 have examples of how we as humans have a right to privacy, right? And this right to privacy got us abortion rights, which are reproductive rights, and reproductive rights give you a higher chance of having a step in the socioeconomic ladder. Reproductive rights protect women, families, children, everyone from poverty, essentially. We'll get there another Wednesday. But this right to privacy challenge, which is essentially what they're trying to do. They're trying to challenge Roe versus Wade with the argument of personhood, which is interesting. Keep that in mind. But you're challenging privacy with the right to personhood. And I know we're in this weird late capitalism era, but I really hope that there is a dual mixed battle of privacy rights with big tech and abortion rights. I know that sounds weird, but I see an intersection coming that I didn't realize was coming, but it's going to come.
Yeah.
Because your right to privacy is just more than your profile picture on Instagram. It means more than that. It is actually a tangible thing in this world that you have to defend, and its presence right now is in abortion rights, and I just wish more people would pay attention to it in that aspect, because it sounds really topsy-turvy and abstract, but it's very much so the foundation that we're standing on right now is privacy rights. So I guess keep an eye out for that.
I also just want to make something really clear, and it's that the U.S. already has an experience with what life was like prior to Roe v. Wade even being a thing. So before Roe v. Wade was passed, abortion was illegal in most states, and in the states where you could have an abortion, it was only for the instances of rape. And millions of abortions, even though it was illegal, was still happening in the U.S., and over 1/6 of all pregnancy-related deaths were because people were having illegal abortions. So not only were fetuses that weren't even, feeling any pain or anything dying, but so were women. Women were dying from illegal abortions. And so what we have is we have an era where prior to Roe v. Wade, where millions of illegal abortions were happening and millions of people were already dying. And so it's not like people magically believe that abortions will stop the people pushing for these bans. That's just not the reality of the situation. And so I think that we should keep that in mind when we talk about it. I also argue, again, I relate it to capitalism, as I stated early on, but people like to pretend that they have science behind them, and again, I think it's because of this miseducation. Fetuses won't feel pain or develop any sort of consciousness until the 24th to 26th week, and so to have an abortion ban in the 6th week is basically saying they don't give a fuck about that woman. And then you can't even say that they're trying to be moral or biblical about this, because a lot of people point out to Christian fundamentalism, but in the Bible itself, and I should make it clear that I'm not a religious person, but I'm just interested in reading the Bible because I find it crazy that people, seek any sort of moral guidance from this biblical text. But it's not fair, but I didn't grow up Christian, but not only that, but I appreciate books and I appreciate, writing.
You're looking
and
at
so
it as a text.
I've read it as a text, and as a text, abortions happen in the Bible. If a man commits adultery against his wife, she drinks bitter water, and all of a sudden she's not pregnant. What is that saying? That's saying that she had an abortion. So the Bible doesn't even outlaw abortion. So if they want to have a claim to any sort of moral sanctity, they're just lying because they haven't read that text. The Bible has exceptions for abortions. You cannot tell me that you're using the Bible as your moral guidance for not having an abortion.
So real quick, so you're kind of getting into this conversation of kind of the hypocrisies of pro-life arguments. So before the show, y'all were saying that this isn't about pro-life.
It's about reverence of life. It's not at all.
It's
about
about
controlling
the control
women's bodies.
Yes, exactly.
At the end of the day, it falls to that. However, that's controlling women's body. Whatever argument you
People
use
with
against
uteruses.
it, people with uteruses. Yeah, you're right. That's what it is. It's a control. And my thing that I'd love to touch on is why? Why do you want to control?
It's modern day eugenics.
Please, can you elaborate a little bit?
I
Modern
agree
day
with you. So
eugenics.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Real
Well-
quick, what is eugenics? Real quick. I don't know if everybody knows.
Eugenics in a very broad term, we can describe, and this is again based on, I don't know biologically or anything what eugenics would be defined as, but just based on anthropologically speaking. Eugenics is basically just defined as controlling the way that a species evolves. And when we talk about humans, that is controlling every aspect of being a human, whether that comes to race, gender, different health, as they like to say, things. But it could go in a lot of different directions.
It literally just means cleansing the race.
Yeah.
It's race science
race
saying
science.
that within the
Definitely.
species, your race determines your superiority or
Yeah.
inferiority.
And if this sounds really hysterical to you, just look into white supremacy and the history of the United States. These problems are very specific to this country.
The way
Yeah.
And the history.
Nazi
of it.
Germany, they were able to get a lot of their methods from the United States.
Yeah.
Which were based on a lot of
We're
experiments on poor
eugenics
people,
capital.
and
So
people of
sad.
color. Look this stuff up. This is very real. So please,
Yeah, so this is definitely modern day eugenics. When we talk about, so let's just go down, the long winding road of this abortion ban. So something that's also very clear in the abortion ban is any abortion after 6 weeks is illegal. That abortion could be intentionally caused. And this is something that I am personally very appalled and an advocate for, because I've had 3 miscarriages in my life. None of the pregnancies were wanted. None of them, this isn't something that I speak about often, just in case I start crying. They were not wanted, but I also, all 3 times, did not know I was pregnant until about a week within having an abortion, having a miscarriage, sorry. So when they have this abortion ban, they basically made the language so that it could be any kind of intentional end of a pregnancy and terminating a pregnancy. So if, let's say, you have a miscarriage while you're pregnant and you are 11 weeks along, which is a perfectly normal time to have a miscarriage, by the way. If somebody says, well, she had a glass of alcohol when she was, I'm going to estimate 6 weeks along, which maybe you didn't know. Yeah, maybe you didn't know you were pregnant until 8 weeks along, you know. But somebody could definitely say she intended to kill her baby. She intended to harm her baby. And that is, at the end of the day, you know, something that needs to be mentioned for my next point. We also know, because of lots of health statistics, that black women statistically are the most likely to have miscarriages in the United States. They're the most likely to meet health disparities when they're pregnant. That could lead to termination of their pregnancy. So that's step one, right? That's like phase one over here. And then we look at, well, the education system, like we talked about, doesn't talk about a lot of things that relate to pregnancy, wellness during pregnancy, things like that. And then we look at, right, so that's phase two. Then we look at, where does sex ed tend to be lacking? We're looking at inner city schools. We're looking at places where redlining happens. We're looking at places where people of color, poor people, different marginalized groups all are cornered and sectioned off so that they receive a less quality education. And then you're also looking at the fact that, again, going back to black women, you're looking at the fact that black women at the end of the day are in the court system, in the justice system, they're treated with much harsher sentences, much more, much less leniency than white women, or any other group of people. And if abortion is criminalized, and if you're given a harsher sentence because you're a black woman, and you're sent to be a felon, and now you can no longer vote, you are now, and a lot of the times, black women also become infertile during miscarriages, during medical procedures, again, medical racism, people that are literally going in and tying women's tubes without them knowing. And this is all stuff that you could Google, by the way. Anybody in the audience? It's definitely, yeah, it's definitely still happening. So when we look at all of that information, it's clearly, it's modern day eugenics. It's targeting the black woman. It's targeting just the black people in general, people that have uteruses.
And immigrants, everything. Yeah.
I also want to note that something else that was inherent in the eugenics movement was sort of like the reproduction of white people to upkeep white supremacy. And so this was something
especially
that I was
white people, because they didn't like poor whites either.
Yeah, this was something that I was this was something that I was championing a lot, but I do want to add two things, and I'm like, Angie, like I'm really happy that you share your story so that people know how traumatic this is. But because our education system is so bad, I just want, if there are guys watching or people who don't have periods watching, a woman, or someone with a uterus, someone able to bleed, gets their period every 3.5 to 4 weeks.
And it can be late.
It can be late. I one time had a period that was 9 days late. So that's approaching like a 5.5 week mark, and I was scared that I was pregnant. And I went and I took 2 pregnancy tests, and it came up inconclusive. So I was like, holy shit, am I actually pregnant? And is it too late for me to take Plan B because it's been days and I haven't gotten my period? And my partner at the time, he already understood all of this, like agency, bodily autonomy. I didn't want kids, so we were ready to go to we set up an appointment at the Planned Parenthood office, and then the morning that I woke up to go, I had my period. And so when you think about that timeline, this isn't something where 6 weeks is far off. Like, you can be late until 6 weeks on your period and think that that is absolutely normal and that your period is still coming.
And not to mention, some people with uteruses don't even get periods.
Exactly.
My period is super irregular. I could go
and you can
3
still
months.
Get pregnant.
Exactly, I could go 3 months without a period or not bleeding, and my body still has a period. It's just that no blood is coming out, and this is something that, again, you guys can Google
I had no idea.
at all.
That lack of education. But I did want to note that another thing that these bans are doing, and Angie did touch on an important point, is that the people that are pushing these bans are Christian fundamentalists and straight up and down white supremacist pro-lifers. What they are pushing for is for white poor women to be reproduced to their reproductive capabilities to keep the U.S. a white majority country, because the birth rates for white people are low. When you think about how they're treating Native and Indigenous communities, when you think about how they're treating Black and inner city Latino communities, They're pushing sterilization. They're saying that we're having too many kids. They're saying that we're overriding the welfare system. So when you think about these bans, they're literally saying you poor white women need to be reproduced to your reproductive capabilities to keep this a white nationalist state, and you black and brown people over there, and also over there that we're not letting in the country, you need to stop having kids.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely also studies that show, like, when you go to women's health centers and again, anybody with a uterus, but when you go to women's health centers, Planned Parenthood, some of the first things that they recommend to black women are to get your tubes tied.
Exactly.
And black men, they tell them, you know, you can get a vasectomy. And it's just like, why is that the ultimate option? Like, but it's what's forced on you.
So real quick, let me read some of these comments. Dwenda's saying, not only in this country, also South America, white folks are preaching eugenics. Osho Travels is saying, my wife experienced a miscarriage. The Texas bill would launch an investigation to make sure miscarriages were not self-inflicted abortions. That's nuts. Yeah, so because we're running out of time quickly. Another thing is that this isn't about pro-life. Because if we actually cared about lives, we wouldn't be throwing children into cages, right? We wouldn't be, police brutality is a thing that separates families. There are multiple ways that family separation happens, and a lot of them are through murders by the state. So if we actually care about people's lives, we wouldn't be doing this in the first place. So I'm glad that y'all pointed that out. I also want to say thank you so much for the language as far as people with uteruses, because I had never thought about it in that capacity. So just sometimes it's so educational just having the language to be able to say something in a different way that's even more inclusive and just it just includes people, right? So thank you so much for all of you have been kind of using that language. So we're running out of time. We have about 10 minutes left. It's been 47 minutes already. Y'all talk a lot. Y'all talk a lot. Also
so
Travels is saying great chat, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in. But yeah, so some kind of closing remarks. So we've said a lot tonight. We've talked about gender inclusivity. We've talked about bodily autonomy. We've talked about eugenics. We talked about Roe versus Wade. Thank you so much for bringing that up too. That there was a time before this, because it's actually pretty recent, 1973, when it was passed. And before that, women were literally throwing themselves down the stairs, or people with uteruses throwing themselves down the steps. I mean, you can look it up. The horrible
Abortion rates have declined since the 1990s.
Say it again?
Abortion rates have declined since the 90s.
Okay,
So, you know, like, I don't know, to me, abortion is a medical procedure. My reverence for life is highly tied to science and the human experience, which is once you are a viable human being, you experience. Infanticide is different than abortion, so for anyone on your Facebook feed that is saying stop killing infants, let them know that it's different. Yeah, continue what you're saying. Sorry.
No, you're not.
To wrap my thoughts up on the pro-life movement, I would just say that, again, if you were pro-life, you wouldn't be caging children at the border. You would be preaching about keeping families together. If you were pro-life and you honestly cared about, people not having abortions, you would be advocating for there to be more access to sex education. You would be advocating for there to be more access to resources like contraceptives and safe sex resources. And you would fundamentally recognize that it is up to a person to choose. The reason why people in the US specifically, for instance, are having less kids, it's not because we're a developed country. The number one reason people are saying that they're not having kids is because they don't have health insurance and they don't make enough money. They cannot take care of a kid. And for me, as someone who, based on my belief system and my moral belief system, I would not want myself, and I would not want to force someone who do not believe that they're able or capable to take care of a child to be forced to have a child, because I would feel a lot worse knowing that someone who didn't want a child had a child and cannot take care of that child, and now that child will grow up feeling unloved, unwelcome, etc. Like, we have a big foster care system in the United States. If you are pro-life, you have so many other avenues that you can share your sort of love and, this sanctity that you hold for life. And it's not in regulating women's choices on whether or not they can have kids, regulating people with uteruses' choices on whether or not they can have kids, and sterilizing people that you deem inferior from having kids. And I think that all of these things are connected, and I just don't want people to lose sight of that. Like, these abortion bans have nothing to do with science, because the science proves that they're, stupid. They have nothing to do with morality based on the Bible, because the Bible makes a case for abortion. And they don't win any of those arguments. And when you come down to it, it is literally to reproduce this sort of toxic understanding of race, nationhood, all of these things that we should be rejecting.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, problem he kind of saying, I don't want anyone committing suicide because of these ignorant bans.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think I was gonna add on a point. Like, think about where the person is coming from when they make these rules, because like, I really feel like there is just like this tone deaf type of mentality when it comes to like men and like, or even like women in like higher like privileged status or whatever. They don't get it. They don't get how important it is for an individual to make family planning choices. When you have sex, how you have sex, if you're allowed to have kids, if you're allowed to use contraceptives. These seems foreign to us in this world, the free world, right? But these are things that are constantly fought and battled for, and will always be, in my opinion, through human society. It's going to be something that we're always debating. But like, just because you are in a higher power country, it doesn't make it to where it doesn't affect you. So look further into these bans and these headlines and these things. Like, why is this happening? Why is there a control? Why is this? What is the rhetoric that is going around you that continues this?
I also just want to note before Angie gives her final thoughts, and I'm so sorry because I didn't ask you your pronouns beforehand, but I think that these bans are also attack on consent as well. So especially when you look at the Alabama ban, if someone is raped, that's something against that person's will. They must still carry to term a child.
Yep.
I think that there's currently a case going on where there's an 11-year-old girl that was raped, and that 11-year-old girl must carry a baby to term after she experienced trauma. Like, I think that these arguments should also talk about consent. And why is it that we are constantly questioning a woman's right to consent? Someone with a uterus's right to consent. Trans women are also being attacked as well. Like, they do not care about consent. They do not care about your humanness. Like, I just think that that's also something that we should talk about. Like, the civil rights that are being violated in these bans, outside of just the fact that they don't want you to have bodily agency. They're now also telling you, you do not have that choice to make consent on what happens to you and how you choose to handle what happens to you.
This is one of the tricky things when we talk about civil rights. So civil already implies a legality issue. So your body is politicized, which is something that we've kind of been alluding to the entire night. Your body is politicized. Sexuality is politicized. Race, all these things are things that politicize your body. So as soon as we do this, the state has a power, gets to exercise a power over our bodies, right? And it happens in many ways. So one of the only places you can actually get frisked, like in a legal way, is the airport. Like, we really don't think about it in that way. Like, they're literally patting down your body if they want to.
In New York for like 5
so,
years.
So the point is that we need to be very careful about the way bodies are politicized and the things that we do to perpetuate a politicization of the body. Just to kind of wrap us up.
I think that there is just, again, I may not necessarily agree that it's tone deafness or that people don't know what they're doing, because I definitely think that they're doing this with purpose and they're doing this with reason. But I think that for the people who agree and people who think that this is something right, I definitely don't think that they understand. I'm gonna, just say, like, there's this really amazing movie that I had to watch for a class called If These Walls Could Talk. I'm gonna trigger warning that because it could be very triggering for people who just don't. It's very graphic. It's a very graphic movie, but it basically follows the stories of 3 different women at 3 different time periods. I think I might get these wrong, but one was in the 50s, one was in the 70s, and one was in the early 90s, late 80s. All women who were pregnant and who were seeking an abortion, and how their stories turned out. And all three of them are very traumatic, but it gives you this insight as to what those women were experiencing, what their lives were like, and actually talking about things that were important, even though all three women, I'm going to disclose it in the movie, were white, and roughly middle class. It still shows that there is so much more in these situations. They're so personal, that at the end of the day, how could you really dictate
Right.
overall this blanket rule about how me or any other person with a uterus is supposed to deal with a pregnancy, is supposed to navigate that. I think that eugenics will always be a thing. I don't think that's going to end, but like you said, there's definitely a lot more about this conversation that people need to keep in mind. And at this point, for you to not know about these things, for you to choose to ignore things that you have access to and things that are very easily looked up through statistics. Google is free. You don't need somebody to educate you. You can definitely go educate yourself. It's
not everybody, but
white women that
I don't know,
are
man.
rich still have
Google and
access to
Facebook.
abortion.
not everybody. Not everyone has access to internet. To understand these things.
Google Scholar.
So,
Please.
Scholar. But yeah, I definitely think that there is so much that it has to go into this conversation, because it's not just abortion. It's definitely not. It's a whole interweb connected by capitalism, white supremacy, misogyny, misogynoir.
It's like 4 Wednesdays. It means like 4 Wednesdays.
Yeah, it's an infinite number of Wednesdays, honestly. But yeah, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, especially in the next couple months, as people wait to see if the Supreme Court is going to take on the cases, if it's going to be a nightmare.
Thank you all so much for
I'm
sharing
ready.
tonight. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for your courage and your vulnerability to share your stories, share your experiences. This is not easy. We're talking about very serious things that have very real impacts on the lives of people. And anytime we talk about that, it's a very serious conversation. So thank you all so much for being here, for sharing your brilliance and your insight. I hope you all learned something. I know I learned a lot. So we do this every single Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see y'all next week. And thank y'all.